Hello, hello. I'm Pinar Givanch, and welcome to What's Wrong with the Podcast. Today, we have the great pleasure of chatting with Neil Redding, a speaker, author, innovation architect, and near futurist. As founder and CEO of Redding Futures, Neil has led teams and served as an advisor at multiple spatial computing startups, including Auki Labs, Bitreel, and Friends With Holograms, among a range of other clients. Prior to Redding Futures, Neil led innovation at Mediacom, Gensler, and ThoughtWorks. A computer scientist by training, he has also delivered for dozens of clients, including Visa, Nike, NBA, MoMA, Apple, and Oracle. In addition to the consulting with clients worldwide, Neil is a frequent keynote speaker and has presented at conferences like South by Southwest, Building the Future, and Immerse Global Summit. Enjoy. Hello, welcome to our podcast. Today we have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Neil Redding. Neil is a speaker, author, and innovation architect, and a near futurist. Welcome.
Thank you. It's really great to be here, Pinar.
So please tell us more about yourself and your background and how you came to be a near futurist.
Sure. So I've been calling myself a near futurist for maybe the last 4 years or so. And the story, I'll start actually going back a few decades to in college. I arrived on a music scholarship. I studied piano my whole childhood, and I wasn't super passionate about it, but I did enjoy it enough. And I was like, okay, I got a little scholarship, so I'll do this. And but I immediately found that really loved philosophy and then computer science, and just, there's a story around how I got into both of those. And those are in totally different departments, humanities and science, right? But the more I got into them, the more I found that there was surprising overlap and connectivity between humanities and science, even though like a lot of the heads of the departments were just didn't really see it at the time. And we could talk for a while about that, but I really, from that point on, and it's easier, I think, to understand the trajectory of our lives in retrospect, right? I think at the time, certainly for me, I was just sort of maybe not stumbling my way, but just sort of following my nose, like following what's fun, what's interesting, especially in college. I didn't do computer science because I thought I'd make a lot of money, although I did make good money, but it was fun, it was interesting. And but in retrospect, I see it as this beginning of this lifelong professional trajectory around connecting what seems to be things that seem to be different from each other. And so I did software engineering for quite a while out of school, and including a lot of graphical user interface software starting in the 90s. So it was a lot of connecting humans and computers and how computers can become increasingly intuitive to use. That was always an interest of mine. I actually started doing immersive and even VR work in the 90s, VR for the web. There was this uh, protocol, we called it, or a language called VRML for describing virtual reality modeling languages for describing 3D spaces for the web. And that didn't get very far at the time, but it was a hugely ambitious project. But it was also about bringing digital and physical together, like bringing humans into immersive digital spaces. And so fast forward through a lot of different work that I could get into, but probably won't. The way I see my whole trajectory is bringing digital and physical together, bringing human technology and um, digital technology together, and then even more recently, especially since the pandemic, focusing even more on how the world, even though we see it as a bunch of named and distinct, separate people, places, and things, and we're trained to see the world as a bunch of things, the world is really deeply connected, and I would argue made of ecosystems. And so this way of seeing the world for me has evolved from, like I'm describing, these decades of connecting the dots between things that seem different, uh, has led to a way of consulting that I've described as near futurism. Um, I'll say specifically that, I mean, I love that it landed for you as, ooh, that's something interesting. It's a different thing at South by as well as everywhere. There's lots of people calling themselves futurists. And that's great. I mean, I think futurism is an important practice. Foresight is an important practice. Prediction or prediction of probable futures is important. I leverage this work, but that's not what I do. And people were calling me a futurist starting a few years ago, and I said, it's not quite right. What is right? And so, even though I work with emerging technologies and capabilities that are just starting to become real or useful, I focus on the near future, which is to say what's emerging today as newly possible that can be put to immediate practical use for brands and businesses and other kinds of organizations that I consult with or that I speak to. And so that, again, the connectivity of new possibility today with um, opportunities to solve business problems or brand problems or evolve a business model, I see it as continuing to build on this lifelong trajectory or at least career long trajectory I've had of making these connections. And so I'm just someone, and I know there are lots of us in the world who really love making connections between things that seem different and just thrilling in that, delighting in that, and problem solving through that lens.
So I love, you already are touching upon so many things that I love hearing, especially around recognizing, our world being ecosystems and connecting the dots. I think one of my biggest frustrations today is like seeing innovation happening in silos or bubbles still. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, as you started into getting into the near futurism work and looking into these like ecosystems, what are some chronic issues that you started to see, and potentially what were the underlying reasons of those issues for you?
Sure. So we could take a step back and talk a little bit about something that I imagine we'll come back to a little bit later, which is design thinking or user-centered design. And probably a lot of your listeners are aware of this. It's really a way of relating to building products and solutions, including technology solutions, that's been kind of status quo for a few decades now. Actually, I think it really got underway in the 90s, thanks to IDEO and others. But that whole practice, really simply put, is to really pay close attention to who is the user, like who are you building for, and what is that person's daily life like? What do they care about? What are their physical and emotional and mental capabilities, right, to interact? So just paying a lot of attention to the user, the person. And that's been great as a practice for building products for a long time. Uh, the challenge of it is, and I guess I'm getting into the sort of abstract framing of the problem, then we can talk about more specifics. The challenge is that really in the past decade or two, and I think it's largely thanks to social media building on the internet and just this kind of global connectivity, instant connectivity that we have, and the whole mobile era, the problems that we have and the solutions that we need to build don't have just a single type of user, or they can't be created by just focusing on a particular user. And so a lot of the designers I've been working with um, are responding to this. And I mentioned this in my South by Southwest talk, that design thinking itself and user-centered design is no longer sufficient for solving the kind of problems we have, because the problems are systemic, or you might say they're kind of problems with ecosystems, right? Ecosystems are being disrupted, just like natural ecologies can be disrupted by an invasive species. Um, Ecosystems of friends and families and communities and even societies can be disrupted by technologies that show up, right? I mean, we've been aware at the macro level of how the introduction of Twitter and Facebook and things like this early on, and even like 15 years ago, there was the Arab Spring, there's wars that have started, kind of on both sides of, facilitating or fomenting these mass movements um, that really happen as a result of, you might even say, an invasive species that is like social media or the internet. So, so the problems are ecosystemic, we might say. And so I think the solutions also need to be framed at that scope, at that level. So looking at different types of participants is the language I like to use with ecosystems, right? So we have participants that are not just a single user we're designing for, but um, I mean, one simple example is, as Amazon grew as a service, at first it just seemed like the user that they were focusing on is the shopper for books or the shopper for whoever, right? But over time, there are many other users, the delivery people, the merchants that are building their shops on Amazon, all the people using AWS services, um, and on, right? There's just, and the warehouse workers become aware of, like, what is it to be a user of Amazon's warehouse services, so there's just lots and lots of, that's just an example, but lots and lots of different types of participants in these ecosystems that are business models, that are businesses in social context. And so, and I'll add here that I use this sort of generic sounding term participants intentionally because we also have participants that are technology based, right? An easy way to understand this is if you've been paying attention, as most of us have, I think, to generative AI, um, we know that this technology is moving quickly towards the realm of agents, right? Which is a term that Sam Altman of OpenAI and others are using to describe AIs that can actively participate in solving for something, right? Instead of just using a chatbot like ChatGPT and issuing commands, you can give a higher level brief. For those of us that have worked in design or consulting, right, we understand what a brief is. It's like, I need to have um, I'll just make this up. So this is an example I heard in a podcast recently. Like, my kid's having a birthday party 2 weeks from now. This is his age. These are his friend group. These are the things he likes to eat and not like to eat. Go make it happen, right? Book the restaurant, invite the people, find something that works in my price range, all this stuff, and AI agents will be able to do this. That's a simple everyday example, but we can think of AIs and AI agents as also participants in these ecosystems that are our businesses, that are business models, that are our everyday lives. So this is a long answer, but I'm trying to frame up the different pieces of the kind of the worldview or the mental model. The problems and solutions that we're working with now are these complex ecosystems rather than just single types of users. And so I think you asked about what what kind of work do I do and what kind of problems am I seeing with clients. I mean, businesses are, I think, just slowly, especially large established businesses, right, are just slowly coming around to understanding the importance of engaging with the world and kind of framing their problems in this way. And it's very easy and very common. The term disruption has been used really, really widely over the last couple of decades, but one form disruption can take is uh, a business is sort of, for many, many years, happily serving a particular customer in a certain way with a certain kind of product, but then gets lazy or stops paying close attention to the needs of the customer and just pays more attention to, as they do, right, optimization, cost cutting, blah, 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 all these things that are not what the participant of the customer needs in this case. And then a third party business can come in, and this is a form of disruption, right? Just create a better product, a new product. They're a new upstart company. And so they're really focused on, how can I take away this customer that someone else is serving? So I see this as a focus on points of connection or potential connection between a brand or a business and a customer that are languishing, that are not being connections that are not being made effectively um, in the status quo. So, I mean, we could talk about examples. I don't want to go on too long before we come back to a conversation, but an example here could just be that we all know, like, most of us listening to this, I imagine, remember the point when, we didn't have a smartphone. We had people call feature phones, like some Nokia phone or some Razor flip phone, whatever. And then there was the iPhone, and there was Android phones. And then eventually we're like, ooh, this is, um, we experienced this shift to these new types of devices that have new capabilities. And I think it's fair to say that the Nokias, the Motorola's, the companies making those feature phones just were not paying enough attention, I think, to what was going on, what people wanted to do with their devices, what was happening in social media, blah, blah, all these other things. And so there was this huge opportunity for another business to come in and sort of steal those customers away, into a new type of device, a smartphone, an iPhone or Android phone. But this happens all the time. And the way I see it is there are connections that are languishing or connections that are not being made, that if they were made, they would lead to a much stronger business, because stronger relationship between a brand or business and its customer or its potential customer. Does that make sense? So
Oh, totally. Yeah, I have like a lot of things to touch upon from what you're
sure.
saying. I mean, first, I guess, when you talk about participatory practices, it's just music to my ears as a, inclusive design and co-design practitioner and educator. But I think what happens even sometimes in inclusive design is while we're very much focusing on like diverse audiences or including audiences that we typically don't include, right? We could still separate ourselves from thinking the broader context, right? The business models, the social context that we're talking about. So all practices I see also in like design could have the risk of, falling into its own bubble almost, forgetting that we operate in systems. And that's like one of the reasons why I also like really just got really, really into systems theory and just reading a lot about it, right? My undergrad, ironically, was in systems engineering. I never knew it was going to be like coming around like full circle. But
Love that.
what I'm really interested in is like the more you read into it, also like reading into like recognizing we're in complex domains, like how we need emergent practices to like address these systems, or how we actually need to grow slowly in order to be able to build better like systems, right? And all elements of a system. And we are doing quite like not that, right? Like we're like with technology is exponential growth, like, and we're like spreading that all over our systems and see like what might happen. Let's just see. And then innovation in big companies, as you also said, could happen very slowly or in silos, while we need to kind of address these problems as well. And we still like everybody champions innovation and at some point, but people, even if they champion innovation, they may not like the change, and that sometimes gets in the way, not if not most of the times gets in the way of innovation. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on some of the things that we're seeing like happening also. It's like quite repetitive too, right? Like problems in innovation work streams maybe in companies, right? Or not even like recognizing something very human, that we just change. Language changes, generational preferences change, like everything changes, and we are just like, oh, and for the example of like Nokia, like maybe past generations didn't have to have social media in their pockets, so they didn't care. Whereas like now it's, I have a 5-year-old, it's intuitive for her. She thinks Alexa is a person, right? So we like the generational shift. So understanding human, and going back to earlier what you were saying in kind of these like science and human just behavior and like psychology and all of them, both like our systems, but everything about humans also coming together. And I don't know how you kind of work around that in such scale, like in big corporations that are also in departments, right? Like when the more I'm like getting obsessed with the systems, the more I'm frustrated with systems design, like how our systems are designed today. And when people say the system is broken, I feel like the system is just designed that way, but it just might be obsolete or is purposefully designed that way. So I would love to dig deeper into a little bit around like the systems, since you also talk a lot about like the ecosystems.
Yeah. Yes. So so much there as well, Pinar. I mean, I feel like we could do 10 podcasts on all these
I
topics.
know. This should be a
Um,
talk show.
so it's interesting. You talked about things moving too fast and then also things moving too slow, right? And I think these are both true in different contexts. Sometimes it feels like we're dragging our businesses along, or if we're consulting to businesses, it feels like they're just really stuck, or there's so much inertia, um, where we see as maybe younger, more innovation positive people, like, more just like, come on, like, just like, we need this from you. Or even as a customer of a business, right? It's like, why can't your app do this very basic thing, right? I'm just trying to do some transaction. It's a bank or whatever. So there's this inertia. And then on the other hand, I think certainly with AI, I mean, one of the things I talk about often with why I focus on the near future as opposed to further out, is that the future is just coming at us so fast these days that, as I say, traditional futurism and foresight is just no longer enough. And I think, as we're saying, traditional design thinking or user-centered design is also not enough. And so, what do we do? I think, when I reflect on why it is that I feel primarily optimistic about all this change, is that I tend to think of technology and emerging technology as something that has its own trajectory. It has it's doing it's on its own evolutionary path. And this is not, my original idea. I mean, I referenced Kevin Kelly's book, What Technology Wants, that I think he published in 2010, where he talks about how technology drives its own evolution. You can kind of see this over time. Um, and specifically with AI recently, there's this whole dimension of explainability, which, if you're paying attention to AI, one of the topics that comes up often is explainability, and specifically how, you know, Gen AI tools like ChatGPT can give us answers to questions, but how? How did they arrive at this answer? We also know that they hallucinate, which is to say they make up wrong or factually incorrect answers often. Um, so there's this general sense of, we want to know, show your work, right? This is how we grow up in school. Like, teachers say, show your work, because then even if you get the wrong answer, we can at least have a sense as a teacher, or even as a parent, like, what was your thought process, right? But right now we can't get AIs to show their work. These large language models don't show their work. And even the people that build them don't know how exactly they're generating what they're generating. So I say all that as context to point to something I'd heard not that long ago, and I'm forgetting who actually said this on some other podcast, but that there's lots, of course, and over the eons of human existence, there have been plenty of things that we've discovered on this planet that we don't understand. We don't know how to explain it. So we develop a kind of natural science. We develop a mental model, or we develop religion or story, whatever. Lots of different ways we learn how to explain something, but we can just keep it at natural science. Um, and we may need to develop this about AIs, about generative AI tools, right? That even if we don't know kind of a priori or deductively, we can't describe procedurally how they're getting the answers they get. We can study them and develop a science of explanation for them. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And it dovetails with the idea of AIs being a new kind of participant, these agents being a kind of new species that are participating in these ecosystems that include, the sea and the air and non-human living creatures and microbes and all of us and all the technologies we're building. And so, yes, I mean, basically thinking in systems, operating in systems, paying attention to connectedness is all necessary. I mean, I think it's just the new complexity that we just have to live with. And I mean, as much as anybody else, I certainly appreciate simplification, and I think sort of user-centered design or design thinking, historically, or really, frankly, any kind of systematic approach, going back to Occam's razor, right? Simplest explanation tends to be the right one, is sort of how we've grown up thinking systematically, but or scientifically, I guess. But it's not sufficient for the level of connectedness that we have in the world.
I feel like it should just be more relaxing, right? That I think it just forces us to understand, okay, like we can't do it all. We're not expected to do it all, right? We just need to like work with as many diverse parties, whether that's like tech, whether that's like people, as possible. I think it's just more, if anything, like we need to kind of lean into that like decentralization, like we can't do it all. And I guess like that's one of the attitudes that corporations can maybe adopt, because I feel like, as we're a much smaller studio. For us, it comes natural to kind of like collaborate with as many people as we can, or like parties or other stakeholder groups, right? But for big corporations, I think the bigger you are, you kind of feel this responsibility of like, oh yeah, we need to do it, or we can actually do it all. And then you're finding these very narrow tunnel like visions like being created within each organization and their own culture. And that's when you were mentioning how like you can lose touch from the people while you're actually the people also, right? But you kind of create this like a different separated world that stops understanding where we're going, and maybe even our not even future, but like near future. And we keep saying near future. I know you have a brilliant framework around it, so I want to give you space to like walk us through that, so that the audience can also listen to what I was able to listen to at South by.
Sure thing. So I mentioned I've been calling myself a near futurist for maybe 4 years. It actually came to me in the context of I've done a bunch of work in retail, which just happens to be a industry sector that, starting from working in the agency world, the creative agency world in New York, and then at Gensler, this big architecture firm, there's a lot of retailers that have physical spaces that um, want to provide experiences for customers as part of their marketing, as part of their brand expression. So anyway, I created this publication on Medium, an online multi-contributor blog called Near Future of Retail. That was about 4 years ago. And so eventually over time, I just like the term near future. It felt like, I think, like you're experiencing it, right? It's an unfamiliar term, but also immediately understandable. People get what it means. And I defined it back before the pandemic as the coming 3 to 5 years, right? In terms of emerging tech, the technology that we were looking at really up till the pandemic anyway, like last decade, we can say, felt like it was, if we thought about the 3 to 5 year time frame, we all felt like we could roughly have a sense of what's going to happen over that 3 to 5 years. That was all disrupted, right? Certainly by the pandemic, where we realized, oh, wow, huge change can happen that has cascading impacts, very quickly and with almost no notice, right? Very few people were expecting a pandemic that would be that disruptive as COVID was. And then as we were all kind of finally over a couple of years getting back to something like a new normal, a new rhythm, we'll call it late 2022, right? ChatGPT showed up. And even though this was, and people who are developers or practitioners in AI would say was not actually out of nowhere at all. It's been the evolution of these technologies for a long time, but it was a step change, a qualitative shift culturally, because for the first time, this machine learning model that has incredible capabilities that GPT does was available as a chatbot. And just about everybody can type in a natural language like English and interact with it and experience it, right? So my point is just that, and then in the last year and a half, right, since ChatGPT hit the market, we've just seen just incredible rate of advances in AI. So all of that is just to say, here we are, early 2024. everyone nods when I say the future is just coming at us so fast that our traditional methods for engaging with the future are no longer enough, right? So you're asking about what is near futurism. The way I define it now is simply it's connecting what's emerging as possible today with what's immediately practical for brands and businesses. And I have a very simple two-circle Venn diagram, kind of the minimal Venn diagram, right? Like possible and practical overlap. And so it's where these two overlap that the real magic happens, that we can actually do business model transformation. And so what that actually looks like in the context of a near future framework workshop, as we call it, is it's really three phases. I mean, the first is we come in, and we often do this in a 3-week kind of sprint. We need to have, we're coming in with a new business or a new client, right? We need to have subject matter experts and a few leaders of the business who understand and can speak to, in the context of a collaborative workshop, like what is this business? What's the business model? How does it work? Who are the participants, right? And we've worked with businesses that are quite large and sprawling and old. So they have like lots of different kinds of participants, from employees and manufacturers to regulators and business partners and drivers for shipping their stuff. And like, so there are lots of different kinds of participant humans as well as technologies. So first week, we call it understanding practicalities, right? Like what is the current practical state of the business model? Second phase, so we do a lot of mapping that out and creates a business model canvas, but something evolved from that. Second phase is exploring new possibilities. And so we actually roll up our sleeves and with clients, help them really firsthand get a sense of how do these technologies work, whether it's different kinds of AI tools, spatial computing tools, XR, immersive capabilities. These are all areas that I personally have had a lot of experience with, as well as our business partners that help us with execution. So, but clients really love this phase, like of exploring these possibilities, because a lot of times they haven't really used these tools. So then we've got what's the practical state of the business? What are these new possibilities that new tech enables? And then the third phase is connecting these possibilities with practical opportunities, either problem solving for businesses or new opportunities to evolve, connect with new kinds of customers, like we were talking about earlier. So the form that the output of this brief workshop takes is hypotheses. Like if we did X, like if we connected this new capability, Gen AI for creating this kind of document or for solving this kind of everyday business operation, or if we used, Apple's Vision Pro or Quest 3 headset, to train our workers or to allow people to collaborate in immersive 3D over distance, whatever. I mean, these are just example ideas of new possibilities. If we connected this possibility with this particular business activity or this business problem, we would expect this outcome, this customer benefit, this business benefit, this cost reduction, whatever it is. So we have a set of hypotheses that can then be prototyped and tested and then iterated upon and brought to market if they're successful, if they're promising. So connecting possible and practical is a simple way of framing this whole exercise, but we find that, and I think clients find that it's really, really useful for relatively quickly getting a sense of, I'll just say it this way, like moving from abstract understandings of what AI, spatial computing, other kinds of sensors, in physical space, things like this, moving from an abstract understanding of what they can do to practical possibilities for their business. And even if they don't go a lot further than this initial workshop, many clients find that this is super valuable. Just it's clarifying, right?
Yeah, I love this so much because also I feel like for any of our like young listening base too, like what we want to make change, right? Like everybody wants to make good impact in this like world. They're like that's why we had probably disruption is like one of the most overused like words in the past like few years. But this is such a practical and actionable like roadmap that you're creating, which is not only just like realistic understanding corporations and how they work like more and more, but also I feel like it's motivating for young designers or futurists to even feel like, okay, we are pushing for this change, because this change, especially in like such organizational, large scale organizational context, which, you know, these organizations might be legacy firms that are around for 100, 200 years. Like that change is going to happen slowly. There's no disruption, immediate disruption whatsoever. But this helps you kind of like build, okay, like this is maybe we change like incrementally. This is maybe how we adopt new things. And the structure that you were like describing kind of gives you this like feeling like you're making progress, right? Like we looked at today, we introduced the new, now we're connecting the dots, now we're going to prototype. Like it's quite actionable. And I feel like that that's why I really loved it when I first heard it too. When, you know, I love speculative design. I don't mind futuring, you know, like ideating around like 50 years from now. But bringing this to practice, and especially business context, like this felt very real. And which, you know, funny, as you were also talking about like thinking of like future or like technologies, I watched to kind of do like a comparative analysis between 1990s and now. I watched Matrix trilogy again, like just like as like a, how did I perceive it then? How do I look at it now? And I'm looking at it and I'm like, yes, like machines didn't take over, like we're not there, or you know, who knows what's gonna happen there. But the AI agents, this was always the thing, right? Like when you were saying like now, like after ChatGPT launched, like it made it real. And maybe it was because it was suddenly conversational and accessible and very relatable. And that's, even though AI, like I rewatched AlphaGo again.
Mm.
And I was like, now it's so obvious, like, yes, like beating AI in a game might be very difficult. Yes, that's very normal. Back then was like, how did the machine beat me? Right. So we're kind of so it was already there and it was happening. Suddenly we just like scaled it and made it like language based and like conversational, and that suddenly made us panic or excite us, right? We went into like different extreme like feelings. But when you watch Matrix, you're like, oh, you know, like all of this was already, you know, a big conversation in the 90s. Obviously, I didn't appreciate it at the time with my age. Like everything just felt like very futuristic. Um,
Mm.
that's, I guess, like the thing too, right? Like if Matrix was created in a way where it felt like, how does this translate into near future? I feel like it wouldn't have felt like, oh my God, this major sci-fi movie. So I
Right.
think how you present it and structure it and how you built the framework around it kind of really helps us like, yes, if that's the world, how do we get there in, you know, in real actions today, instead of obsessing about like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now.
Yes. Again, so much there, Pinar. And I love the Matrix, and you probably saw me reference it at least twice in my recent talk. So I'll refrain from that in this context, other than to say, well, I'll just say I'm most interested in something you were saying earlier, actually, and you touched on it again just now, which I'll reframe as, we were talking about sometimes it feels like we're moving too slow, sometimes it feels like we're moving too fast. I really like the concept of ecosystems, and then a related concept of evolution, because, and as you said, you know, there's a way in which we can, I don't forget if you use the term relax, but I mean, I think we need to sometimes just relax a bit and understand that ecosystems evolve at different paces. You know, sometimes there's mass disruption or like species extinction. There's, you know, global pandemics, but most of the time there's this seeking of an equilibrium that feels like things are moving relatively slowly. And that's just how ecosystems are, you know, in their normal state. And that's how big established businesses are in their normal state. You know, that's frankly how human culture is, how humans are, right? And so many of us, you know, I'll certainly raise my hand and say I'm really freaking frustrated about a lot of absurd behavior that humans are engaging in right now that's massively destructive and sad and horrifying. And it feels like, when is humanity going to get over, warring and bombing and fighting with each other, um, and I think I see many promising signs that we're emerging into this awareness of how interconnected we all are, and how, to put it really simply, like if I'm bombing you, I'm damaging myself as well. I think this is absolutely happening when we look at, the current, Russia-Ukraine situation or Israel-Gaza situation. Everyone suffers really from these actions. And without going down this rabbit hole, I feel like, to me, the lesson that it just raises again is we're all interconnected. I think humanity is awakening into this awareness of being interconnected. And I think this next era for humanity is really about, so what? Okay, so everything is connected. We're all connected. Now what? Now what do we do if we acknowledge this? And I think, to your point, I mean, we learn to practice new ways of designing, new ways of building, new ways of bringing in diverse humans, diverse technologies. I think this era of AI agents I like to be excited about it. I mean, we get to choose whether to be scared or excited. I mean, look, it's happening. So I think let's bring these agents into the conversation. Just like, I mean, many of your listeners might be, maybe you, and certainly I, like, we have conversations with these Gen AI tools, and there's a way in which it's already feeling like they can participate in, um, like, I use ChatGPT as a thought partner often, right? I'm thinking about something I want to write, or a new talk, or like an email I want to send to somebody who I don't really understand their worldview or their, role in the business, but I want to reach them. And so I can get help from these large language models that have been trained on practically everything that's publicly available, which is a lot of stuff that humans have created over the past 30 years of the internet, right? So, or at least the web. So, I mean, we're entering just a very, very interesting era where I feel like there's this real opportunity for a massive connected collaboration to solve really all the problems that we are encountering on this planet. So I don't know, I feel very, very optimistic. You're not even asking me this question, but I feel like, but to bring it back to near futurism though, and yes, like you, I appreciate sci-fi. I appreciate, looking out further. I do feel like when I watched The Matrix recently, which I kind of do often, it feels, I mean, certainly like we are inspired by, and it's like art reflects life, reflects art. I mean, we've kind of built towards that vision in some way that was in The Matrix, even though it wasn't all like a positive future. But I feel like many aspects of what was in that narrative are coming to fruition. And I think there are exciting aspects, there are scary aspects, but I feel like the main takeaway is that we are converging with technology in many ways, and really aligning human technology and nature technology, as I like to call it. Nature technology is massively advanced, right? There's all kinds of things in nature that we have no idea how it's doing what it's doing, and we're just very, very, like, we wouldn't exist if it wasn't doing what it's doing. So anyway, a lot of different topics here, but I feel one other thing I would say that was interesting that you pointed to is that, certainly for me, I mean, and I'm older than you, clearly, but my parents, and I was raised with this cultural context, right? And if we think about the 20th century, post-industrial revolution, I feel like the story of the 20th century in the West especially is this story of, we can do anything, we can effectively dominate nature, we can control nature. And that's kind of been the story of civilization for a long time. And I think that's a ultimately kind of mistaken premise, that we took really as far as we could. And we're just sort of slowly dragging our feet into this realization that actually, if we take that concept or that impetus to its logical conclusion, we get climate crisis, we get pandemics, we get these things that we can't control. And so relaxing or just acquiescing, or in fact, even thrilling to the idea that things are much bigger than us and we get to participate in them rather than control them, is I think a mental shift that's really important.
I love that. And I love that you're kind of wrapping around in this like note of optimism. Obviously, I identify as a optimist too. And I'm also just very intrigued to see, what tech has to do with human evolution altogether. Like what you were saying in terms of our convergence with human made tech and nature tech. And, quickly like referencing AlphaGo, like this world champion, 18 times world champion, after like playing AlphaGo was like, I just learned so much. I learned so much. I was challenged in a way that I never was, and I learned so much. And what happens to us with the exposure with such technology, right? I'm very intrigued in like seeing that. Like when I was 2, maybe I knew 2 songs because that was my access, right? And now my daughter, when she was 2, she probably knew 200 because of Alexa and Google Home, right? And I think we just like our brains, like there's so much discovery there too. And I'm very curious to see what happens to that with tech, and how do we, to your point, like be more connected and collaborate effectively. Also recognizing that tech is a participant in that. I'm very excited to see the opportunity, cautious optimism, right? Always, but very excited to see how it might really help us kind of getting realizing that no, we're part of nature, there's no domination, or like we're all in this world, and what do we do about it? I do want to be mindful of your time, so I want to quickly wrap up with, for anyone who is obviously like just trying to push boundaries, make some progress in this world, what would your advice be to them?
So a simple thing to say, aligned with everything we've talked about, is to start seeing ecosystems, like to really take time to, and sometimes this requires slowing down, right? Like you can do it we've all had the experience probably of like taking a slow walk through a forest and like picking up a rock and looking underneath it and discovering a whole civilization of insects or mushroom mycelium or any number of other things, right? And just looking closely to discover how things are connected. But so we've done that in the forest floor under the soil. We can do something analogous in our daily lives, right? Just to start to look at how do we impact each other? How does what I do, um, yeah, impact businesses that I interact with? How does what they do impact me? I mean, I think there's so many undiscovered points of connection that I think are really, really valuable. And in fact, we could say that every new innovation, every new product, every new service, every new, even a cultural shift, right? Even a political shift could be understood as a result of discovering some new point of connection, or opportunity to create a connection that was previously undiscovered or unutilized, untapped, So I think it's a mode of engagement with the world. And I find, and people I work with find, that this is really, really valuable from a consulting perspective as well. I mean, I think, businesses are awakening into the reality that they they're being held accountable. They need to be accountable to not just formalize things like UN sustainability development goals, but also uh, how people think they should behave, what kinds of products they should make, and all of this benefits from, and the consulting work that you do, that I do with businesses, I think benefits from just being as awake as possible to all these points of connection.
I love that. Such a human advice. Thank you so much, Neil. This was such a treat.
Thank you.
You advocate for this becoming a talk show, but we'll discuss about that later.
We'll do it again. Thanks, Pinar. Great chatting with you.
And that is this week's episode of What's Wrong with the Podcast. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Links can be found in the episode description, and you can also find them on our website, podcast.what'swrongwith.xyz. If you found value in the show, we would appreciate if you could rate us and leave a review, or you can simply tell your friends about us. For more details on our guests, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Don't forget to join us next week. Thank you for listening.